Today we're heading way back to 2019 when I created this vortex ring. So for today's Throwback Thursday video, let's head on down and make the vortex ring together.
So here's the ring. This is obviously quite a large and dramatic ring, but you can make this with a much smaller gemstone if you prefer. The tools we're using today are round nose, bent chain nose and flush cutter pliers, a ring mandrel, and the materials that we require are 20 inches of 1mm gauge copper core wire, 20 inches of 0.4mm gauge copper core wire, and the bead of your choice. I am working today with an 8mm round of really beautiful tiger's eye. So this is an entry level or beginner's project, which if you just take your time with, I'm sure that you are all perfectly capable of achieving. As I said before, it's one of my best-selling designs and I really love to make these. If you are having a moment where you've perhaps lost your get up and go with jewellery, this is one of those designs that you can get through and then be quite proud of yourself because it's such a pretty design, but it really isn't that complicated to create. So I'm going to move some of my tools out of the way and hopefully my bead won't end up on the floor. We're going to start by forming our basic ring form, which we're using the 1mm gauge wire for. And what we need to do is size this up about 4 sizes if we're looking at an 8mm gemstone, because when you look at the design, you'll see that part of it rests under where the shank of the ring passes. So although we will be able to elevate it slightly, you do need to take into consideration then that the gemstone will sit slightly lower, and unless you have very squishy fingers, you do need to allow a little bit of extra size, somewhere between 1 and 4 extra sizes, depending on the size of the gemstone that you're using. So to begin with, I'm going to pop this around the ring mandrel, and I'm going to do this at around about a size Q and see how we get on from there. So I have preconditioned my wire as we discussed in the basic wire handling and tips. And I'm going to get that to skirt around 4 times as you look at it from above, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to sit that centrally to prevent wire wastage. We're going to get that to sit centrally, and we've got 4 passes of wire. We're just going to open that up so you can easily see 2 underneath, cut wire this way, 2 at the top, cut wire that way. If you flip the design over, you'll see only 3 passes of wire. For the next stage of the demonstration, we are going to remove this from the ring mandrel. Now, because we're working with nice fluid copper core wire, which is a semi-soft or soft wire, you do have the opportunity of mangling it slightly, deforming it so that it comes off round. So just do take care to ensure that you're holding that cautiously and that you're not going to give it too hearty a squish. We will pop this back on the ring mandrel for several more parts of the demonstration. So let's just move that for now. I'm just going to open that out slightly so it's easier for me to see what I need to see. I'm going to bring in my 0.4mm gauge wire. You can do this with 0.5. 0.6 is slightly tougher on the hands. I'm going to find the central section of my 0.4mm gauge, and this again is around about 18 to 20 inches in length. I'm going to begin by putting the centre of my 0.4mm gauge over the centre of the ring shape that we have created. And if you can see, the cut tail of my wire is going to come over the top of those 2 passes on this side and back up the centre on the same side as the cut wire. So we come all the way around, and rather than going up this side, which is not cut, that's a sealed side, we're coming up the side where we have that tail of wire which has an end. So I'm going to draw that all the way around and get that really nice and firm over the top. I'm going to now pass the wire, the fine wire, the 0.4mm gauge, around about 6 or 7 times around the 2 sections of wire that we just looked at, and I'll show you that as we go, but I wanted to explain that I'm doing it 6 or 7 times to reflect the size of the gemstone I'm using, because we want to get a really nice firm grip on the shank of the ring, but also we need a little bit of space between the centre of the drill hole of the gemstone and where we're going to start moving the wire across the shank later. If you are working with, for instance, a microfaceted, a 2, 3 or 4mm gemstone, then you only really need to do 3 or 4 passes of wire at this stage. But you will see as you are working, when you get the gemstone on and you start working on the second side, you'll see what looks aesthetically pleasing to you. So I'm just going to take that tail around here and back up on the same side of the coil, pull that nice and firmly into position. So that's 3 passes, 4 passes, nice and firmly, keeping those squished up together. You can of course use your pliers to do that squishing if you like, but please take care that we're not squishing the ring form out of shape. So that's coming up on the correct side. I'm just going to support the coils as I bring that into position, and then all the way up again. So I think we've got 6 passes there, 5 or 6 passes, so I think we'll do one more. Now in terms of aesthetics, it always works for me if I have the same number on both sides, so you will just need to check that before you continue. What I'm going to do is now flip the ring over so that we basically put that upside down, and we're going to work on this side. So what I need to do is grab the gemstone and slide that down the cut end of the wire that passes over the centre of the ring. Pop that through the drill hole and down it goes. So you can see at this stage, if I show you sideways, the reason we talk about sizing up the ring slightly is that you have the gemstone is currently sitting beneath the surface of the wire as it would interact with the finger. Now in the course of the design it does tend to lift up a little bit, but not always a great deal. So just bear in mind that this could be one size larger than your client or yourself would generally need it. So I'm now going to repeat on the second side exactly the same thing. I'm coming over the top of the 2 passes of wire on this side, back up through the centre and encircling around those 2 lines only. Now at this stage you will have a tendency for things to get slightly away from you, so just support your bead that you're working with whilst you draw this around, always being cautious that we're not squishing the ring out of position. So I'm going to continue to wrap around those 2 lines, like so. So I think we've got 3 passes, 4 passes, and just keep that in position as you go. You can use the tools, but for me I just want to make that nice and tight by utilising my nails for the moment. So I'm going to do another couple of those. You will be able to bring this up to your face and check the number and just make sure that they are the same so that you have that sense of symmetry. We'll go for one more and then we'll call it a day on going all the way around both of those. At this stage what I tend to do is pop the whole design back onto the mandrel so that we can just make sure that the sizing is going to plan, and also so that the shape is kept in perfection. So I'm just going to bring that back in now. Just slide that on and just make sure that both sides are reflecting the same kind of size. You can very, very carefully just pull those ends if you prefer, just to get that teased into position. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a squish down, remove it back out, and there we go. We're looking at the basic segment of our ring. Now the next bit, I don't expect you to follow me all the way through, so we might do a bit of a magic cut here, but I'll just show you the beginning and the end on both sides. So I'm going to take the tail of my wire and now pass this only around the cut end that we're working on. So there's the cut end, bring this back into the centre. We're going to go all the way until we use up all of this tail of wire. Now it's very much like gizmo coiling, but you're doing this by hand instead. So you would do on this side and on this side exactly the same. So now, by the magic of my husband's technical ability, we are going to take a short break and come back to you when I've completed all the gizmoing. Ooh. And we are back. I've done some gizmo coiling around either end, and I'm just going to show you on the second side of the cut wire how to just finish that off neatly. Here I'm using my bent chain nose pliers, and just for ease of use I'm going to remove this from the mandrel, and you can see I've just left about a centimetre of wire towards the end here. It gets a little bit springy once it's been used for a while, and when you get to that last tiny little bit like so, you'll just want to chase that around in the same direction that the wire is travelling with your flat facing pliers, and just give that a nice scooch up so that it sits tightly. Now if you're pulling on this wire and pushing on that wire, what can happen is that this circle will decrease in size. So before you get too heavy-handed, you might like to pop that back onto the mandrel, and you can give that a nice squeeze, and in this way we're getting it neatly sized up. Now you will see if I turn this sideways that the gemstone is starting to sit proud of the ring, and that size difference is slightly less important. What we will do to just kind of make sure that we're looking at getting this nice and neat is just push that down between the two tram lines. I'm going to pop that back onto the mandrel now just to support that shape and ensure that we're quite happy with the size before we start the next segment. So because we're now better able to see what kind of size we're working to, if you want to take that down a size, it's much easier to remove some of that size than it is to bring it up, because you'll find that the gemstone just doesn't want to sit neatly if you try to extend the wire that we're working with. So I'm going to now use the mandrel to get this to a size that works for me, and I'm just also going to very gently just press the gemstone down into the mandrel. So if you are working with a steel mandrel, just do this very cautiously. Now the first section is to create the central vortex, which I'm going to do by bringing one of my gizmo sections around the gemstone in a beautiful curve. And then, however works best for you to hold, we're going to take the second coiled segment around as well. And you can see with the amount of wire that we've used, those two sit really neatly opposite to one another, and it also hides the wire that we use to secure the gemstone in position. The next part of our tutorial is very much like the rose ring design that we uploaded a few weeks ago, so if you wanted to check that video out, if you're very new to wire work, then give that a look, and it will give you some indication of how you can get into a flow when you're making a rose ring design. But what I'm going to do now is take the bare wire around and just slightly underneath on the one side, and then we can start working as if we're working on a rose ring. So my underneath wire just lifts up ever so slightly, and the rearward wire comes past underneath, and then you would just continue around until we have just a little bit of wire left on either side. So I'm going to spin the mandrel because it's easier to kind of demonstrate to you how that works, and we're just taking the second wire, the rearward wire, underneath every time. And if it starts to get a bit feisty, because the more the wire is worked it can get a little bit springy, then we can just use the mandrel to our benefit to get that to sit exactly how we want it to. Now I've got about 2–2.5 inches of wire left, so we're getting down towards the area that I want to tie this up. So I'm going to take that second wire around the outside and then underneath, just ensuring that the first wire we're looking at is elevated in the central section where the shank is, second wire around, and then push them both down. So this is what we are looking to be working with. We've made ourselves a little nest with a vortex in the centre, and now I'm going to trim those so that they are similarly sized. So we're going to lose maybe 1 centimetre off this side, so that we're now working with the same size of wire. Now it is easier if you work with tools to help you draw these tails of wire now through the centre of the piece that we're working on. So I'm just going to remove that carefully from the mandrel, and you can wiggle that if you're working with a wooden one. Be careful if you're working with a metal one. So in much the same way as we did with the original rose ring, we've got a tail, and we're going to take that tail through the centre of the ring itself, pushing that down without deforming the shape of the ring that we're working with, and then rescuing that tail and bringing it back up the other side. So I'll show you that again. I'm just going to very gently bring that together a little bit for the time being, and continue that back in its original direction. And what we're doing here is we're locking the size of the ring and drawing those 3 passes of wire that sit underneath all together. So if you pop that back onto the mandrel, you'll be able to see much better that they are drawing together and becoming a much neater shank for long-lasting wear. So I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side, which is to just warm that wire through gently, take the tail through the centre of the ring, all the way around, you can help that through in the opposite direction, and then back, travelling in its original direction. So back onto the mandrel to preserve the size and shape, and then pull that nice and firmly into position. There are a couple of ways you can finish the ring off. You can just put a little coil on either of those ends, which you can sit upwards and inwards or outwards along the shank of the ring. And I'll show you one of each on the design we're working on now, so you can choose which looks best for you. For me, I desire symmetry in this kind of design, so I would do them both the same, but for demonstration purposes I'm going to show you both options. For this next section we will be working with the round nose pliers. So I'm going to remove the ring from the mandrel. It is starting to grip. And I'm just going to look at the length of wire that I have available. It's actually quite a lot, so we're going to make quite large coils. If you wanted more diminutive coils, do trim that down. So coming to the end of the wire and the tip of my round nose pliers, I'm going to create a coil. There is a video on the channel all about coils and creating the perfect coil. If you are brand new and you feel the need to refer to that, please do. Utilising my flat facing pliers, I'm now going to continue to create that coil and get that to sit down against the shank of the ring with a squish. So you can see it's like a little bit of a scroll, very, very neat and tidy. I'm going to do exactly the same thing to begin with on the other side. So again, tip of the pliers, end of the wire, and we're just going to create a coil here. All the way around, switch to my flat facing pliers and continue to coil this upwards, but instead of squishing that flat against the shank of the ring, we're going to draw that upwards and inwards, which gives you a different dynamic and a different feel. So what I would now do is pop that back onto the mandrel and just circle that around and make sure that there are no loose wires that are uncomfortable. I'll then pop that on my own hand to double check it, and you can raise those little circular segments or the vortices in the centre until they sit exactly how you want them to sit. So you can have your coil coming upwards and inwards, or you can have them going outwards. It depends really how much space you have available and the size of the ring. So that is my personal favourite ring design to work on. It's my VORTEX design. It is a very, very good seller for me, and I hope you enjoy working on that. If you've not already subscribed, do please hit subscribe, and I look forward to coming back and seeing you again very soon. Thank you for giving me your time. I hope you have a lovely day. Bye bye.